By the end of this video, you'll be able to create your own calculator application using Python. So Python is simply an easy language to learn, and due to its high demand in 2026. So we shall start with the data types in Python. So Python is an easy language and it has different data types, for which I'm going to explain those that we're going to use in this project. So the first data type is an integer. An integer simply is like a number. So examples of numbers, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. So an integer is simply a number. And another data type is a float. So a float is simply a float value, and a float value is just a number but with decimal places. So the difference between a float and an integer is the decimal place. So a float has decimal places. For example, 1.24, 2.34, 3.55. So that is a float value, and an integer has no decimal places. So another example of a data type is a string. So a string simply is a letter, the best example of a string are letters and other characters except numbers and float values. Only numbers and floats can be strings only under certain conditions, but for this case we shall not go into that. So how to use integers? So we use integers simply by assigning this short form of integer. So the short form of integer is simply int or int. So you write int, then you open brackets, you write a specific number you want. So this helps us in performing calculations. If you don't include that, the computer shall take the number as a string, and if it's taken as a string, that means that you cannot perform calculations. So the next one is a float. How to use a float? So use a float simply by writing the word float, open brackets, then you write a number. So in the bracket you can simply just write a number either with a decimal place or one without a decimal place. But for this case, the result, in case you wrote just 12, the result shall be 12.00. So the last one is how to use a string. So the best way you can use a string is just by writing the word print. So print, as it is used in basic English, simply means providing an output that can be observed on the screen. So once you write print, if you write print, open brackets, you write quote unquote. So you should note that as you're stating a string, it should have quotes. So you write quotes, then in between the quotes, then you write the word, any word you want. So for example, I've wrote the word food. So this makes it a string. So what makes a character a string is simply the quotes, the double quotes you include. So that makes it a string. So if you write this statement, print in bracket quote unquote food, then the result shall just be the word food. So you're going to test this and see. Or if you write this, if you write total is equal to the quote food plus the quotes, then money, so the result shall be food money. We shall see that simply. So now let's begin with the project. So assuming we would like to add 1 plus 1. So to add 1 plus 1, remember I told you that we term them as an integer, or you can decide to write them as floats. So let's begin with an integer. So one int, we write int, open brackets 1, then we add a plus sign as it is used in basic mathematics. We add a plus sign, again you write int, open your brackets, then you write 2. So the result of this, so assuming, let me first add something here, assuming we say that the sum is equal to int of 1 plus int of 2. So int simply means integer of 1 plus the integer of 2. Then we want to print the sum. So print, open brackets, then sum. So the reason as to why I have not included quotes for this certain condition is simply because that sum contains some deeper values within it. As you can see in the first line, that sum is equal to int of 1 plus int of 2. If I had included the quotes, the result would have been just the word sum. But if I do not include the quotes, that tells Python that this is simply a component containing some other components, containing sub-components within it. So if I write print of sum and then I run the code, you can see here that the result is 3. If you look closely, the result is 3. So that brings us to the end of this tutorial. Feel free to comment, like and subscribe. If you're not well covered with the environment I'm working with, you can view the first video that I posted to understand how to use the environment. Thank you.